Hi SCP students, I'm about to start reading chapter 2 of Call It Courage. So if you remember, Mafatu, his name meant stout heart, which means that he's brave, but he actually was very scared of the sea, which when you live on a very small island is really tricky. So after his friend made fun of him, he just decided that he was going to conquer his fear of the sea, and he grabbed a canoe and he just went out onto the ocean in it, which maybe wasn't very smart. He wasn't very planned and didn't have things with him and didn't know where he was going to go. So this chapter is called The Sea. Daybreak over a gray and dismal world. The canoe lifted and fell idly on the glassy swells. Mafatu looked back over his shoulder, searching the horizon for a last glimpse of Hikaro, but the atoll had vanished, as if to hide itself forever from his concern. The matting sail slatted uselessly, but there seemed to be no need of a sail. The little canoe was riding one of the mysterious ocean currents that flow in their courses through the length and breadth of the Pacific. They were the ocean currents that had carried the Polynesian navigators from island to island in the childhood of the world. Mafatu was drifting farther and farther away from his homeland. With wide flapping wings, Kiwi rose from the bow of the canoe. In ascending spirals, the bird climbed higher and higher until at last he was no more than a gray speck against the lighter gray of the sky. Mafatu watched his albatross disappear and felt a desolation flood his heart. So whenever we see Kiwi, we know that there's hope. And so now the author has made Kiwi fly away, and Mafatu is feeling like it's really hopeless. Now there was only Yuri to keep him company. Do you remember that was his dog? In the hostile world of sky and sea, Yuri. The yellow dog lay curled up in the shadow of the bow, opening one eye from time to time to look at his master. Wherever Mafatu went, Yuri too would go. All around, as far as the eye could reach, were wastes of leaden water. The canoe was the moving center of a limitless circle of sea. The boy shuddered. His fingers gripped the paddle convulsively. He thought of Kana and the other boys. What would they say when they learned that he had disappeared? And Tavananui? Would there be sorrow in his father's heart? Would he believe that Moana the sea god had claimed his son at last? It was an ominous, oppressive world at this season of storm. Half a mile distant, a whale heaved its varnished hulk to the surface to throw a jet of vapory mist high into the air. Then it submerged, leaving scarcely a ripple to mark its passage. A shoal of flying fish broke water, skimming away in a silver shimmer of flight. A dolphin sped after them, smooth rolling in pursuit, so close that the boy could hear the sound of its breathing. This world of the sea was ruled by nature's harsh law of survival. Mafatu knew the sea with an intimacy given to few. He had seen fleets of giant mantas whipping the lagoon of Hikaro to a boiling fury. He had seen the mighty cachalot set upon by killer whales and torn to ribbons almost in the blink of an eye. Once he had seen an octopus as large as the trunk of a tamanu with tentacles 30 feet long rise from the mile-deep water beyond the barrier reef. Aye, the sea. Mafatu opened one of the green drinking nuts and tilted back his head to let the cool liquid trickle down his parched throat, more refreshing than spring water, cool on the hottest days, and as sustaining as food. The boy scooped out the gelatinous meat for Yuri, and the dog ate it gratefully. The ocean current which held the canoe in its grip seemed to have quickened. There was a wind rising too in little puffs and gusts. Now the canoe heeled over under the sudden attack, while Mafatu scrambled onto the outrigger to lend his weight for ballast. If you've ever seen the kind of canoe that they would use in the Polynesian, so there would be a canoe like we have, but then there would also be a weight called a ballast, and so they can use that to keep balance in the ocean. Then the wind dropped as suddenly as it appeared, while the canoe righted itself and the boy breathed freely once again. He searched the skies for Kiwi. His albatross might have been one of 1,000 seabirds flying against the roof of the sky, or he might have vanished utterly, leaving his friends here in solitary space. The bird had led Mafatu out through the reef passage at Hikaro into the open ocean, and now, it seemed, had deserted him. A storm was making, moving in out of those mysterious belts which lie north and south of the equator, the home of hurricanes. The wind shifted a point, bringing with it a heavy squall. Mafatu lowered the sail on the run and gripped the steering paddle with the hands that showed white at the knuckles. All around him now was a world of tumbling water, gray in the hollows, greenish on the slopes. So a squall is like quite a dramatic storm. The wind tore off the combing crests and flung the spray at the sky. Like advanced scouts of an oncoming army, wind gusts moved down upon the canoe, struck at it savagely. So busy was Mafatu with the paddle that there was no time for thought. He called a prayer to Maui, god of the fishermen. Maui, mataitu! Somehow the sound of his own voice reassured him. Yuri lifted his head, cocked his ears, thumped his tail for a second. The canoe rose to the swells as lightly as a gull and coasted like a sled down the frothing slopes. What skill had wrought this small canoe, this dugout hewn from the mighty tamano tree? It swooped and yielded, bucked and scudded, one with the fierce element whose back it rode. This author really likes to use a lot of descriptive vocabulary. So it's kind of neat to listen to all the ways that he's describing things that are happening. The sky darkened. A burst of lightning lit up the sea with supernatural brilliance. An instantaneous crack of thunder shattered the world. Lightning again, striking at the hissing water. Mafatu watched it with fascinated eyes. Now it was all about him. It ran to the end of the boom in globes of fire that exploded and vanished, and in the awful moment of its being it revealed mountain shapes of dark water, heaving, shouldering. How long could this frail craft of wood and senate resist? Under the combined attack of wind and sea, it seemed something must inevitably give way. The wind shrilled a fiercer note. Spray stung the boy's flesh, blinded his eyes, chilled his marrow. The sail went first with a split and a roar. Fragments swept off on the back of the wind. The cords that held the mast hummed like plucked wires. Then, with a rending groan, the mast cracked. Before Mafatu could leap to cut it clear, it snapped off and disappeared in a churn of black water. The boy clung to the paddle, fighting to keep his canoe from turning broadside. Water swept aboard and out again. Only the buoyancy of Tamano kept the craft afloat. Yuri cowered in the bow, half submerged, his howls drowned by the roar of the elements. Mafatu gripped his paddle for very life, an unreasoning terror powering his arms. The sea that he had always feared was rising to claim him, just as it had claimed his mother. How rightly he had feared it. Moana, the sea god, had been biding his time. Someday, Mafatu, I will claim you. The boy lost all sense of time's passage. Every nerve became dulled by tumult. The wind howled above his head, and still Mafatu clung to the lashed steering paddle, clung fast long after strength had vanished and only the will to live locked his strong fingers about the shaft. Even death would not lose the grip of those fingers. He held his little craft true to the wind. There was a wave lifting above the canoe. Many the boy had seen, but this was a giant, a monster, livid and hungry. Higher, higher it rose, until it seemed that it must scrape at the low-hanging clouds. Its crest heaved over with a vast sigh. The boy saw it coming. He tried to cry out. No sound issued from his throat. Suddenly the wave was upon him. Down it crashed. Chaos! Mafatu felt the paddle torn from his hands, thunder in his ears, water strangling him, terror in his soul. The canoe slewed round into the trough. The boy flung himself forward, wound his arms about the mid-thwart. It was the end of a world. The wave passed, stunned, gasping. Mafatu raised his head and looked about. For a second he could not believe that he still breathed and had being. He saw Yuri wedged under the bow, choking for air. He pulled the dog free. Then he saw that his string of drinking nuts had vanished. His spear was gone. The knife that hung about his neck by a twist of bark had been torn away. Even his pareo of fiber tapa fell from his body as water soaked it through. He was defenseless, without food, without weapon, hurled forward on the breath of the hurricane. Numb of all feeling, empty as a shell, still he clung to life, and the hours droned by. So gradual was the storm's easing that at first the boy was unaware of it. The wind was blowing itself out, moving off into the empty spaces of the world. Yuri crept toward the boy, quailing beside him, whimpering softly. Night came and passed.